welcome back to the Humor Hustle. Today we're joined by Devin Moyer. Devin is a musician who, oddly enough, is actually deaf.
Wait, what? I'm kidding.
So, Devin, we want to hear more about you and your story.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about what got you interested as a musician and how you started in the industry.
Well, so, Parker, thank you. I've known you for a short time, and I appreciate you supporting me with my music and sort of my story. And Garrett, thank you as well for having me on.
Absolutely.
Really, what I would like to do in sharing my story with you is to give you kind of a snip of like what I was like, what happened, and where I am today. You know, I can give you a really good idea of how that hustle works in my life, and it is deeply embedded in faith for me. I wouldn't speak necessarily on anything that has a organized religious foundation, but I'll get you a little more depth on how I came into music that contributes to my premature birth hearing impairment. So it kind of gives you a short summary, but I don't know what your first question is.
Yeah, no, we're excited. I think a lot of people out there are looking for voices and people that, to look up to, right? People as heroes. I think what you're going to do for just people that have maybe had something similar happen to them in their lives, I think you're going to be an awesome light and kind of be able to shout out your story a little bit. So, we'll get to your story in a minute, but as far as questions, right? So how does being deaf, excuse me, I have a speech impediment, I guess. How does being deaf influence your approach to music, creation, and performance?
Well, I feel like I've got to answer that kind of by giving you sort of some insight. Like, to understand first, I was born premature, and I was several months behind. I was 2 pounds when I was born.
Oh, wow.
And I had a brain hemorrhage, my lung collapsed, and a lot of other issues that I had. So one of the medicines that they used to treat people at that time is gentamicin, and the side effect of that is damage to the cochlea or the nerves that are on there. So that contributed to ultimately having a hearing loss. Now,
wow.
I should also tell you that there were other children or infants in that care that were all on the same medicines, and my parents had decided at the time he's improving in his health, and so we don't want him to take this medicine anymore because he'll come out completely deaf. They went to the medical doctor at the time, who insisted, no, you should keep your son on this medicine. And it really became some sort of a conflict, if you will. They ultimately agreed not to keep me on that medicine. Well, those 4 other children, except for me, died staying on that medicine, and I didn't.
Wow.
So
you really have your parents to thank for getting you off the medicine at the doctor's, discretion.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I'm going to get into answering your question about how the hearing impairment ultimately impacts my ability to share music and how that was born. But I think it's really impactful to give you some perspective on how I became hearing impaired and sort of this journey in my life from birth until about 5 years old, where divine intervention, if you will, was spoken into my life. I came home on Mother's Day, 6 months later, prior to another visit to the hospital. So I'm trying to be real thorough in the story, but at about 5 years old, I remember putting on a Walkman and listening to Unchained Melody by Righteous Brothers. If you know what that is, it's the theme song from the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze. That just resonated in my soul. And I just went to that piano and I would just hit one note at a time. Every single time I heard that note. Over and over again for a solid couple hours. So I think I learned over time, without realizing it, a 5-year-old boy is going, hey, this hearing impairment is a disability turned into a talent. But I don't think I would start to realize that potential probably for the next 7-8 years.
So your interests really start peaking at 5 years old.
Yeah.
Really is when, and so just back and forth hitting that note. I'm curious, were you able to, since you said cochlear nerves were, damaged in the brain, were you able to hear that, or is it more of a vibration sense when you first started?
Considered a high-pitched frequency hearing loss, so I'll make the joke it doesn't correct selective hearing. If you've got a wife or something, just so you know, it doesn't work. But really, I can't hear bird chirps. I really struggle to hear STH sounds, high-pitched sounds. You can not be facing me and I'll really struggle. But the other frequencies in terms of your bass or mid sounds were not affected. But yeah, so I could get to probably the highest note on a keyboard or something, and there's at some point where even if you turn it up and I can't hear it, like it hurts your ears. You know what I mean? But
Right.
nothing.
Interesting.
I will tell you this though, like you guys will hear that bear like camping, but I'll hear the cell phone in the other room ringing on silent, which is really weird.
That's crazy.
That's actually
So,
crazy.
Like other senses are heightened in some way,
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
almost
so-
like a superpower.
Speaking of the selective hearing, I have a question that's just been burning in my pocket. So if you ever don't want to hear somebody's bullshit, do you ever just reach up and turn them off?
Oh, for sure. Why wouldn't you? Like, as a matter of fact, with my new job that I got like 7 years ago, there was a part of me that wondered. I was like, sometimes I think the only reason they hired me is because they're like, this guy's gonna get yelled at. He'll just take his hearing aids out, and it'll be all fine to manage the whole thing.
I mean, because that just takes selective hearing to a whole new level.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I get told I have selective hearing all the time, but like the fact that you actually have the ability to reach up and you're like, fuck this. I'm out. Like, tune them out. That's kind of a superpower in a way.
I love it.
I think so. I avoided wearing hearing aids for a solid 20 years, and that was probably part of it. I don't want to hear this shit.
Yeah. Oh, man,
that's awesome.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So your journey starts at 5 years old. I guess take us to the next point in life, and we're going to let you be as thorough as you want with kind of your life story.
Yeah.
So we heard your incident at 5 years old. I guess what was the next point in life where you're like, okay, like music really, like you can start kind of feeling this is really my direction I need to go.
Yeah.
When's the next point?
If I tee off from 5 years old, it wasn't born. It hadn't arrived yet. I actually brought it into my car, and I was digging through like this box I've had for years of different things that we saved, and I saw that one of the first things I entered was a reflections contest. Did you guys have those in elementary, where they would do like an art contest or something, and everybody would sign up for it, and the PTA would review it? Well, anyway,
Maybe
they did that
science
back
fair.
then.
Well, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And so it was called the Reflections Contest, and I wrote my own song like at 9 years old, which is my son's age right now. It's really weird to look at him and think about this, but I wrote that first thing, and I submitted it, and I got top 5 in the state of Utah, humbly speaking. And so I think that started to drive it. And anytime there was, like I had a 3rd grade teacher, her name is Mrs. Pearson. I can still remember who she is. And I played that, and she's like, you wrote that? I said, yeah. And she goes, wow. And so there was like this sense of, when you're anchored in that purpose, when you can find it. And for those of you that are talking about like hustling and finding your thing, when you get to that place where you're anchored and somehow you just get this sense of confidence or this purpose that you can hold on to, that I think to me is wrapped around with faith, I started to recognize that at 9 years old.
Wow. That's amazing. And at 9 years old, I mean, I'm trying to think what I was doing at 9 years old. I was probably throwing paper airplanes in the ceiling.
I was watching SpongeBob and playing with those those sticky slap hands where you on the table. Have you ever got those from the arcade or something?
Yeah.
I still probably, that was more like 2 years ago, but
yeah,
they're still fun, I think.
Yeah, my son,
honestly,
my son slapped me in the face with them. I hate him for it,
Yeah. But at 9 years old, man, that's amazing because, I mean, you look at 9-year-olds today, I mean, they're just so involved in, I feel like there's just a lack of purpose, right? You see all these young kids who I feel like deep down strive to be something bigger and better, but because there's just such a lack of purpose or that fire, that belonging, I think that you're after, most of them just, as sad as it is, they just kind of end up, doing what mom and dad tell them to, go to college, go do this, or, that type of thing. And so, no, man, I think it's incredible that at 9 years old you could figure that out for yourself.
To your point, man, everybody needs mentors.
Yeah.
Like to be able to surround yourself with people that have a true desire to help you. Like I took a very short season of piano lessons, and so there were different. And I should do shout out to really my parents. They I think noticed. They took notice real quick, and went, okay, how do we nurture that? And
oh wow.
So. We as a society, I think, have an obligation to get ourselves around kids today to be able to nurture that. Like, if you're going to grow and figure out what your purpose is and you start noticing it, I think we should step up and help them for sure, man. So
yeah, no.
It's easy. This world can be a mess real quick.
Yeah, and I think
100%.
I think it's a lot worse now than it was in terms of like the creative process, because I know that technology now is a lot more advanced than it used to be, but I also think it takes away some creativity, because I know there's some parents that will just rely on just throwing an iPad in front of their kid's face just because like they don't want to watch them, or they don't want to have to like look after them. So they're like, oh, here's your iPad, like watch your movie. But it's like it's taking away creativity, and that's kind of a big issue I have with social media now, especially, is because there's so much like just senseless bullshit that has been going on lately. Like there's been this trend, like the people acting like they're AI. People go on like these TikTok live stream, and they do. Have you seen that? Where
I actually haven't. No.
Oh, so they go on these like TikTok and Instagram live streams, and they act like they're an AI person, and they're just standing there like pacing back and forth. And if someone sends them a gift, they're like, "Thank you for the rose," and then they just act like they're a robot.
Interesting.
And it's just like it's like brainwashed, dude.
Yeah.
Because there's all these. The majority of, I think, TikTok users are all kids that are like, 15 and under.
Right.
And they're being exposed to this stuff that they're thinking is okay or is normal. But it's like, it's so hard to watch because the people that are doing like acting like AI, they're making money from it. And some of them are making like great, ridiculous money from
Wow.
it. So there will be someone like, and it's kind of died down a little bit, but there were some like people acting like AI live streams that had like 4,000 or 5,000 people watching at once. And every time a gift would get sent over the live stream, they'd be like, "Thank you for the rose," or "Thank you for the glasses." Like little emoji gifts would pop up. And it's just like, it's brain rot, dude. It's straight brain rot. And I think it's taking away so much creativity, especially for the younger generation, because they're all like pre-exposed to this stuff. And then a lot of it comes on or is the responsibility of the parents.
100%.
So like they like I said, they throw the iPad in front of the kid that's like 8, and instead of saying like, "Oh, go play outside," or like play a sport or something, it's like a lot of parents now are like gamers and want to do their own thing. So they're like, "Oh, maybe if I just hand them an iPad, or if I just get them like a Nintendo Switch to play on, then I won't have, like, I can just wipe my hands from having to deal with them." And I think that's a big issue, and that honestly pisses me off with like the whole social media thing. But like you said, growing up, you had to find different ways to be creative, and a lot of things that you worked on were heightened because of the sense that you had taken away prematurely. You had to start thinking of other ways how you could be creative and how you could keep up the pace of the direction that you wanted to go. And no, yeah, it's just that it honestly makes me mad that's what it's come to. But the lack of creativity, especially now on younger people, is just it's pointless. It's senseless, and you're not allowing them to be their or live up to their full potential if you're just it's essentially neglect, honestly. But
no, one thing I want to touch on too, and shout out to your parents for noticing this early. Yeah. Like, I mean, I think it's amazing. I think one thing that if I got out of that is we got to call out parents. I mean, you guys can't be giving your kids iPads. You can't be giving them phones because, like you said, it takes away that creativity, right? Yeah. And there's probably a lot of talent, unnoticed talent that goes by because parents are, becoming so reliant on this technological aspect. So, parents, like, what the hell are we doing,
Well, yeah, I mean, goodness, I think about, again, I try not to put this in a religious context, but, there's a reason why I think in two different places it will say, hey, parent, don't exasperate your children. Mm-hmm. And second, kids, you should honor your parents. And I think if that's working in a healthy way, in some way you can utilize technology to your advantage. I mean, imagine a 9-year-old kid who would have had parents that said, fine, I'm going to work and spending quality time with you, supporting you in this, what we see as a talent, and being able to utilize the social media platforms. The last thing I would have been doing was have been dealing with some kind of an AI gifting some glasses and roses to me, somehow thinking that I was accomplishing something, let alone trying to give back to society. Yeah. So it's really important, I think, to kind of hold on to those principles in life that you hold tightly onto them. But, excuse me, the reality is the world holds loosely to it. Well, why is that? We live in a fast-paced, high society, and quite frankly, in some ways, we're selfish. Me included, right? It's really hard to be in a situation and not be like, what, I need some rest and I need some other things, and me, mine. And in some way, we hand that off to our kids inadvertently for the sake of buying that time back or not being distracted and some other things. So, in some context too, I also have compassion towards people because, man, it's a rough world out there. And But, you know, like to your point, there's like sort of a yin and a yang effect to that. And I think for sure, you call it out really well. I think it's adding more detriment to kids' creativity and being able to, you know, have a fruitful life rather than the contrary.
Yeah, and I just, again, I'm never going to put it on the kids for like doing this. Like it ultimately comes down to how they're raised. And like the AI live stream thing I was talking about, like there's even some where it's like a dad and a son on there, where like, and the son doesn't want to do it, but the dad wants to make money in some sort of way. So they're like, I was watching this one the other day where they were acting like AI, like the GTA characters. So they were all dressed up like the Grand Theft Auto characters and both moving the same way, like a Wii character or some shit, like just bobbing back and forth. And every time they'd get a gift sent to them, they'd both like in unison be like, "Oh, thank you for the rose," and then just go straight back. And they do this shit for hours.
See, but what's the point of that? Like it lacks creativity. Sure, you might getting paid for it, but I want to go back to kind of what you said. There's no passion. There's no derivative behind this. It's like, I mean, sure, you can get money, but for me, I'd rather have a sense of purpose in life.
Right.
Like, there's just no point to things like that. So
yeah, and like, I don't know. I'm trying to put this into a context that's where I say nicer things, but it honestly, at least like the way I was raised, and I'm very grateful that like if I did something wrong that there was punishment for it. But now it seems like there's no discipline, there's no, and people don't even call it discipline anymore. They are trying to call it like abuse or neglect. Like if you, I'm really trying to make this like as nice as I can make it sound, just because like my dad's old school. Like if he did something wrong, like he reaped the punishment for it. And so for me, it's like you can't just let that go unnoticed, and then all of a sudden the kids are just thinking that they have free reign or rule to do anything, or they're like almost in charge of their parents. So when it's just bad parenting, in my opinion. The lack of creativity comes down to bad parenting, and if they're doing something wrong, the inability to discipline or to punish that wrongdoing is, I think, a big problem and a big issue. And that's the nicest way I could say that. But
I think it was well said.
Yeah, and for the short time I've known you, I mean, I think you've got a great soul for being a terrible person. I'm kidding.
I'm a shitty person. I'm sorry.
Not even.
But you know, you make a good point. I really think that we have gotten away from trying to understand, like, do you know your choices have consequences to them, and to follow through with those consequences. I think it's hard enough as a parent as it is, but for the ones that aren't doing it at all, just because, you know, again, that I can't deal with this, I can't handle it, I can't do it. It's crazy to me where some of those lack of boundaries start to come out. Because the same thing for me, like, you know, I had some pretty good structured parents where I had enough leeway to some degree, probably more than I should have, because I was sort of a rebel. You know, I'll probably dive more in that part of my story, but it was also just enough, like, it was pretty clear, like, you knew, don't cross that line, whatever that was, you know?
Right, but now it's like, where is that line? Or like, it seems like there is no line. Is there even a line? But it's like, I'm obviously never going to drop a name, but I know I can think of some people that have grown up to be pretty pretty bad, let's put it that way. But I think it's because that when they were younger, they just had free reign, and there was no line drawn in the sand where, like, if I cross this, then I'm gonna get disciplined for it. But instead, it's like, oh, I can cross this line and run 2 more miles, and then maybe they'll be like, sit in the corner for 10 minutes. But for me, it was like, there's a line drawn in the sand, and if my big toe goes over it,
you're done.
It's strike 3, you're out, kind of thing.
So segueing into that, I know you said that you had a little bit of like a rebellious phase, or just like a phase of life where things just kind of, I guess, what line did Devin cross that essentially made Devin who he is today?
Yeah, well, I got to give you a disclaimer.
Yeah,
I think before, because this is recorded.
Yeah.
So I kind of think to myself, what I say today in 1 decade, and if my son listened to it or somebody else, they're like, what would that look like? So I'll be transparent and honest and try to, because again, I got to tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. So I'm going to, if I can, pivot from sort of that 9-year-old kid that got into closer to 13. And, I got into the wrong playgrounds at a very early age. You get influences and things around you, and you sort of don't know. And it always starts with, the typical, like, got right into the cigarettes and everything else. And I was probably at 12, 13 years old when I started getting into those playgrounds. And about that time frame, I was probably in 7th grade. I'm going to just kind of give you a side window here for a minute. I was learning to play guitar by then, and just before that, I had walked into my house, and this person now happens to be my nephew's dad, and he's been in my life forever. He, taught me how to play guitar and everything else, but when I met him, we just ran amok with all of our friends and stuff, and he taught me how to play my first song on guitar, and I was in 7th grade. There was a girl that walked in, her name was Brooke, and I just immediately, I don't know if you two have ever had this happen, I'm sure almost everybody does, but something hit my soul the moment she walked in. And I don't know how to describe it, you could probably think it's young love or anything else, but I still can vividly sit in that seat, see her walk in that room, and something had changed in my life. So I'm at this pivotal moment between sitting in these wrong playgrounds, dabbling in all the things that you shouldn't be doing, that I promise you, by the way, son, if you ever watch this, I know all the signs, and I will catch you.
He's got a line.
Yeah. She walked in, and I wrote my first song on guitar, and it was called Same Thoughts. And so I got to know Brooke for quite a while and everything else. And I happened to play this song for her. We snuck out of our house at midnight and met each other with some friends and stuff, and I played that song for her. And the very next day, she went with us boating and spent the entire day with her. And so we go back home and drop her off, and I go into my parents' backyard. We lived against Highway 89 in Farmington, so it's right across the highway from Cherry Hill, if you know where that is. And at the time, there wasn't any kind of crosswalks or anything else. I'm in my backyard, and I just hear this honk, boom. And I went, that wasn't good. I knew somebody had gotten hurt really bad. And I think nothing of it, and I go back into my bedroom, and I'm playing that same song again. And probably an hour or so later, I just got this knock on the door, and a group of people said, "Hey, have you seen Brooke?" I said, "No." "Do you know where she was going?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, she just got hit by a car." And that moment, I heard it still as vividly as I ever did. You could see it just like the movie. You could have directed it that exact same way. Oh, yeah. And I felt like what I described to you, what happened in my soul the moment I had seen her, that same feeling left my soul the moment I had heard that. And I fell on my knees. She was alive, maybe on life support for 3 days later before she passed away. And there's a whole separate story with her mom. Her father, her dad, actually was a Utah Highway patrolman at the time too. So it's devastating as that was for his little girl getting hit by a vehicle on Highway 89. The person who hit her was my sister's friend's mom, so she was closely tied to the family as well.
Oh, wow.
Gosh.
And they later donated her organs. You'll have to read the book that her mom wrote, and I can kind of give shout outs to it at the end. But it's called Angel in Disguise by Alexander Garrett. There's a whole story there, even to the point where they're harvesting her organs. Somebody who used to babysit her was deeply involved in the actual harvesting of her organs. I mean, this is how, if you want to hear me talk about premature birth and divine intervention. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention this to you, that my grandmother, who's also extremely spiritual, and she happened to come from the LDS faith, though, she was saying, man, this kid, it's like health is going good and bad and good and bad. She said she got so frustrated with the Lord at one point and just cried out and said, look, are you going to help him get better or not? Because if you are, just take him. I cannot handle this anymore. She said, I just have this overwhelming, and I've got a journal from her about this overwhelming thing in my spirit that said, Devin's life is in my hands, and I will use his life as I will. The burden of his health has gone from my hands, and I will influence him with, and help perhaps influence others.
Wow.
So, again, I'm fast forwarding here to talk to you a little bit about the rebel phase. Like, you're talking about a teenage kid now who's getting in these playgrounds, who's had this whole mindset, his whole life of going, there's divine intervention and like being spoken into me with these like situations that my grandmother says is happening, to where coming home on Mother's Day, all the way up to now where I'm hearing this person get hit by a car and passing away, and I just played the very first song I ever wrote on guitar the day before. So if I can get really brave here, I got sober right then. Like, I was sober for a solid year. That was such an impact in my life that I just had decided, you know what, like, I'm cutting everything off. I was begging God in my prayers to keep Brooke alive. And I was, a 14-year-old kid who's like, I'm going to be sitting here in this situation if you can please keep her alive. I was like, at that time, dedicated to deciding that I would take care of her for the rest of my life, even if she was, in a vegetable state. Right? There was this desperation of losing someone who meant so much to me. Hope I'm not talking too much, but
No, keep going.
Incredible.
so I and all of this now I see is tied into that hustle that you described to me. I'm a year kind of sober at this point, and nothing's the same now at Farmington Junior High. Back in 1999, we had this huge group, and it was this clique, and then suddenly Brooke dies, and now everybody's not really the same. The truth in life is change is inevitable. For me, again, the Bible would tell me that, like, there's no, like, you should be joyful in trials and tribulations, because they produce perfect patience in you. And when it has its perfect works, you're left without nothing. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what that meant at the time. Where I kind of think now, when I'm going through struggles, I'm like, I have to understand to be patient with myself, to know that I will somehow persevere through this. You're going to work this for my good. I didn't know that when I'm begging and prayer for somebody to actually, keep someone alive. And I'm here sober for a solid year. I'm in my bedroom again, playing that same song 1 year later on the day that she passed away, July 10th, 1999. I've always been wary about saying the story, and I'm now getting brave about it. The only way I can describe to you is I'm sitting on my floor, my bed's over here, the guitar case is on my bed. It's unlatched so you can open and close it, but the case is closed. This maybe happened a span of 5 seconds. Well, the only thing I can describe is I heard what sounded like fire. And I see a pink orb above my guitar case. It opens it and closes, and right when it does, it collapses in on itself and disappears. I was absolutely terrified. Yeah. So I was terrified. And again, forgive me for bringing in a lot of biblical scriptures in here, because by no means on any podcast or anything else, that I would try to look at somebody to encourage them, because everybody comes from different walks of faith and different lives and things. So I want to invite people into a space where really by the end of this podcast and sharing my story, that they know that they're loved, and not in a way that I think that a lot of us here in a carnal world understand. It talks about where people have had similar situations happen to them, and they completely fell on their face. And at that point, it was concrete into my life that God's sovereignty and his presence and his influence in my life was going to be there for the rest of my life. And at the time, it was easy for me to just go, okay, that must have been Brooke. It was July 10th. And, so the story is just weaving together, just so incredibly intricate that I don't think you can make this thing up. I ran downstairs in fear. And my mom takes one look at me and she says, "What's wrong?" And the only thing I could say was, "I saw a ghost." And she goes, "Ooh, scary." And I didn't think she took me serious because she was just doing what she was doing. And I just bawled. And I think that was when it was a very huge moment for her where, like, something genuinely happened to him. So I don't know if I want to take a pause for a minute because I do want to share with you about my Rebel stage, but...
No, I appreciate that insight.
Wow.
It's such an amazing story to, like, just hear. I personally, I've never been impacted like that, right? I've never had an experience like that. But the words that you just said reminded me of a quote that I heard actually at an event that I went to a little bit ago by a gentleman at the name of Rene Rodriguez. And this hit me like a train, right? He said, "I wish you a happy suffering." Mm-hmm. And as soon as he said something like that, I realized, like, holy cow, like, life, as fun as it may be, as joyous as it may be, we still have these moments where we hit rock bottom, or we have these come to God moments, right? And for a while, his words ate at me. I was trying to figure out happy suffering. What is this? But now, and I think you also understand this, life regardless is going to be suffering. It doesn't matter what walk of life it's going to be. The more that you can suffer through it happily, the more chances and opportunities God gives you to become that person. And so, Devin, for real, you're here for a reason, man. Like, your story, like, at the end of the day, man, I don't know. I'm gonna just go out and say it. You shouldn't be here. You really shouldn't. And so there's a reason you're here, and I think you've got a lot of lives to impact moving forward.
No, and we really appreciate that. Being open like that, because this is for everyone watching. The difference between us and different shows like this is I don't want to censor anything.
Absolutely not.
We don't want to cut out pieces of your story, and a lot of other podcasts or shows or stuff like to try and keep it a little more condensed on the type of vibe that they want. A lot of it's censored, and I think it's important not to censor anything, because at that point it becomes a lot more real. And I think people will gain a lot more value listening to stories like that aren't censored, because it's something that they can hopefully relate to a lot more than listening to something like an artificial story or something that's been edited or trying to keep a part out of it. So I really appreciate that you opened up that much, because there's a lot of censorship that I think takes away authenticity. And no, that was an incredible story.
Yeah, I literally got goosebumps, and you nearly got me to cry. I don't cry very often. I was pretty close. That was close. So,
well, I thank you for allowing me to share it. I mean, I very rarely ever shared that with people, and I found that the more I do it, and I think it brings out the purpose of just where I started to create lyrics and have those supportive people around me that just gave some bright spots in the darkest, deepest, painful things of your life, Here, say it louder for the people in the back. Amen and amen. When you were like, hey, I hope you suffer happily. That's really the basis, I think, a lot of it, when we talk about Jesus Christ going and dying on the cross for us. I mean, he was even in the garden, like, pleading to say, if you can take this cup away from me, please do, before he willingly submitted and suffered and died on the cross for people's sins. Now, that's for my belief in terms of what I think my salvation is. But, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, you're going to go through things, and you have to be in a position, hopefully, at least for me, where I think about people that have terminal illnesses and some other things, and I think, if I were to be in that position, and the way that I see you in my life right now, God, and your sovereignty and everything I just described to you, having had that experience, knowing that if I am lucky enough to live to 70, 80, 90 years old, I'm bound to have more tribulations and trials. Your character, you say, never change. Would I view you differently? And I think that's a really hard place for some people to be, when you're suffering. How do you choose to have true joy when you're suffering? And so that probably tees more into, like, you asked about my rebel phase earlier. Yeah. That was my Band-Aid for me, right? Like, I kind of make the joke on this with some people. I'm sure they'd walk into a room and be like, man, I smell a bunch of paint. And be like, dude, I used to huff this stuff to deal with my feelings. What's wrong with me? Who does that? It's like, oh wait, I know a lot of people that did that stuff. It's fucking nuts. Yeah. So, you know, like, if that gives you any context from comedy, like, of the type of person I was choosing to be, you name it, from A to Z, I was that guy, and I was running with it, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, and so, like I said, like, 13, you know, I really wonder sometimes, like, would that have happened to me had I not committed to the sobriety for a year?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I would have leaned into just an act of faith. I don't even know if it happened to her mom or something happened with her dad. Could they have been pleading to have a similar experience, to know that Brooke was okay, for example, and that didn't happen to him? Why me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've spent, heck, that was 14, 20, almost 30 years wondering why that happened to me. So, anyway, there's a part of the story. I'm kind of wanting to get into the rebel phase. I'm just not sure where you want to take it.
No, it's amazing. It needs to be touched on, and honestly, like you said, why me, right? I feel like everyone has certain points and moments in their life where it's like life defining, right? For Garrett, it's going to be something different. For me, it's going to be different. And that's where really your story can connect and touch with people, right? Like, I won't get too much in my story because, quite frankly, I'm pretty boring. But I did have a little bit of a rebel phase as well, where I went off the deep end and started getting involved in, you know, parties, things I shouldn't have done. And eventually it led to me getting, you know, kicked out of home. Looking back on it, it was one of the most miserable times of my life. Again, like a why me situation, right? I know it was hard for my mom. I know it was hard for my dad and family, but looking back, it was still one of the best things that could have ever happened to me. And I'm not saying Brooke's death was one thing that was, you know, the best thing that ever happened to you.
Sure.
But in some way, it still guided and shaped kind of who you are becoming as a person. And that's an incident where you can look back on and be like, this was really my life-defining moment where I said, I'm going to be sober. I'm going to use my talents and abilities for good, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, my sobriety didn't really stay there. You know, it was only about a year before after that. But I mean, I agree with you. Like Romans 8:28 would say, you know, all things work together for the glory of God and for His goodness, for those who love Him, who are called according to His purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it was a short period of time where, like, there I was trying to deal with my feelings, right? And now the loss of Brooke's going on. I mean, we had a whole lot of stuff happening with our family at that time. We had the loss of Brooke. My mom had gotten really aggressive breast cancer, which is cancer-free today.
Wow.
You know, there were job losses, I think, between my dad, and he was, you know, having some good progress in his career. All of those things were happening in a span of time, and, you know, without getting too much into family problems, right? But then we have the loss of Brooke and some other family suicides and some things just a few years before that. So it was so concentrated where the world is just squeezing you. And, you know, I went right back into the same old places, people, things, playgrounds. And so for between about, I'd say, probably 15, could be sooner, to at least 17 years old, you know, that's when I made a trip to a special little place for a couple of months, because they're like, oh, if you're going to be a rebel at home, we need to put you here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that was another newfound kind of surrender and trying to figure out how I'm going to be happy in my suffering, because in that case, I made the choice,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm in there trying to figure out what to do. And as a matter of fact, that was September 11th, 2001.
That's when I was born. I was born
Really?
that year. Yeah.
No way.
So as I'm coming out of the womb, is it like a correctional facility, or I guess touch on, you know, that side of the story? Did parents just say, Devin, where you're making decisions?
No, you know, I got myself into some trouble in my younger years, and I just wouldn't choose to stop being a rebel, you know. So eventually, the state made the decision for me.
The state?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so again, I try to be mindful about all the details of it, and that since has gone away, thankfully. You know, that hasn't been tied into my life, but yeah, I went there for 2 months, and I remember the towers went down, and I started writing, like, you know, a song called Turning Around and some other stuff. And yeah, I was like, some of the lyrics in there was like, I remember when the towers went down, the final hour, they were letting me out, feeling empowered, right, and turning around. So, like, again, these experiences are just starting to shape my perspective about life. And you know, to me, I look back at my kid or some other things, and I go, to struggle that young and to have those things happen to you is crazy. But you talked earlier about parents and people not having some upbringings where there's some stability and stuff. I had that.
Right.
And I was still in that situation. But I'm meeting people, and I can clearly see those who don't.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, and it was a little bit different for me, so I never really had something super pivotal happened to me. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say I had like a rebellious phase, or I had something that happened to me that, you know, turned my life around and made it better. But I had things happen to people that were very close to me that I could kind of take as an example of what not to do, so I could learn that way. So like my birth dad has been in and out of prison basically my whole life. And so like obviously it sucks that happened, because he lost a lot of time to really get to know me and my brother. So I have 3 other brothers, but only one that is from the same dad and same mom. And so he, like, for him, yeah, he lost a lot of time like trying to be there for us and like raise us. But I was also grateful in a way that he was there, because he was giving a perfect example of what not to do. And it also gave me another opportunity to grow up with somebody who was, you know, leading by a good example. So I've had my stepdad since I was, you know, 6, and then if it weren't for him, then I don't think I could have gotten to any place that I am now, because while my birth dad was spending his time in and out of prison, right around when I was 6 or 7 years old. So breast cancer runs in my family as well.
Oh, really?
So my grandma had it when I was around 6 or 7, and then my mom had it, and it seems like each family member that's had it, it's gotten like slightly worse. So my grandma was cleared and went into remission, and my mom got it in around 2009 when I was 8. And she's now in remission in 2011. Shout out, Mom. That's why I got this tattoo. This is her remission date.
Nice.
November 2011. So shout out, Mom. And then my aunt had it, and she got cleared the first time, but she was in pain but didn't think it was connected, so it actually came back. But by the time they found it, it was, you know, it was in her head and down her spine and in her legs, and at that point there was nothing they could do. So for me, the pivotal moment was like having all these things happen around you. Like, I never really, when I was younger, I was really isolated, and it was a big struggle for me to talk to people. And so I spent most days in my room just like playing video games and like isolating and not talking to anybody. But having those experiences, even though it didn't happen to me directly, it really showed me that you never know when things can end or when life can take a turn. And I was sitting there like thinking to myself, I'm like, why am I blocking myself off from the world? And I wasn't spending enough time with family. Like, when we have these family parties and events, and everyone was upstairs talking, I'd just be down in my room, like just isolating. And then, you know, after all that happened, and after the experiences I did have, that was my pivotal point, was like, life comes and goes faster than you could even imagine for some people. And so you really have to be there when it's, especially involving family, because like that's the most important thing to me, at least. But you have to be present, and you have to take advantage of every opportunity that you get to be around them, because, you know, certain things show up in your life, like what happened with Brooke and you know, Parker, when you went through that phase. And even though it didn't directly happen to me, it showed me that there's somebody that I'm really close to, because I feel like there's always something in the back of your mind where you hear about somebody that had passed away or somebody that had gotten cancer, and then you're trying to like close it off a little bit, because you're like, oh, thee but not me type mentality. So, oh, it'll happen to them, but there's no way that it ever happened to me or somebody that's close to me. And then when it does, you're like, holy shit, like, yeah, it's a lot more real. So you have to take advantage of those moments, because, and that was my mentality. I always had the thee but not me. So I was like, if something bad happened to somebody, I'm like, oh, like, what are the odds? Like, that'll never happen to me, but how am I supposed to? Like, I'm not. If something does happen, it's not like I'm going to get a script of how my life is going to play out, right? Like, so you have to be there for those moments and those opportunities. And that was kind of my thing. You know, I've never really had anything bad, you know, thankfully happen to me, but since it happened to people that were close enough to me that I didn't just, toss it away because it was somebody that I wasn't really connected to, then at that moment I was like, life comes at you really fast and you have to be, prepared and be present and take advantage of every opportunity that you're given and just truthfully be grateful every day for what you do have, because there's no matter how bad you think your life is, somebody has it 100 times worse. So you can't dwell on these like, oh, my day sucked, I got fired from my job, or I got, this happened to me, or something got lost, or someone like stole something. Like, there are things that are so much worse. You could come home like, oh, I had the worst day ever, I got fired from my job. Well, guess what? Like, somebody out there like lost their child or had something very bad happen to their entire family, and it's like you can't just have this victim mentality all the time, because there's always going to be somebody around you, no matter how hard your life is, that has it 100 times worse, but is also in a better mood than you. And that's what bothered me. I'd be in the worst moods all the time for no reason, but there could be somebody that grew up without a family that still found positive aspects in the day that I wasn't finding.
Can I ask you, Garrett, though? And I'm just curious, because I listened to your story for a minute, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. Like, I can't even imagine probably what you might have experienced, and thank goodness for your stepdad. It sounds like that was a very pivotal person in your life. And you mentioned, in some ways you'd have these gatherings, and you were like, in the other room playing games and stuff. How much of that do you think was influenced or impacted by genetics and or culture and or like perhaps just the mere fact that you had, a biological dad? Describe what that is. What do you think drove that?
So what I think a lot of it is, so my birth dad side of the family, like a lot of them have very addictive personalities. So a lot of them, I'm trying to dance on eggshells here because it is still my family, but
sure, right.
A lot of them have.
Just know he still loves your mom.
I love my mom. Love my mom. A lot of them on my dad's side had addictions and problems, and a lot of them have been smoking cigarettes every day since they were 12, 13 years old, and then a lot of them have now gone and passed away from like lung cancer, right, like self-inflicted stuff. But I don't necessarily know if that's like hereditary, but it's a very addictive personality. So I don't know where that came from exactly, but it was more like honestly selfishness. I wanted to do things for myself and not for anybody else, and I always thought that the world revolved around me. So anytime we had like a family party, but I was playing a video game, I would looking back at it now, I'm like, why would I ever do that? But at the time, the most important thing to me was passing the level on that game. And I'd always had this mentality of like, I can always see my family another time, but I need this video game right now. It's like, no, you don't, jackass. Like, go spend time with your family. But yeah, I don't honestly know where that stems from, but I was very, very, very selfish growing up.
Yeah, I love that you say that, though, and it almost seems freeing. As silly as it sounds, I almost got chills when you said selfishness, because I think a lot of root of what we are dealing with, and just in the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about, hey, technology is completely ruining kids, and it's being sort of like enhanced by parents, and it really comes down to a lot of it was selfishness because we just don't want to deal with it or some other things. And I really think there in some ways, it made sense to me as I kind of moved throughout my life, again, like through the loss of Brooke and everything, what have you, if they talk about like right back in the garden with Adam and Eve, and then suddenly there's this fallen situation because, as it defines, sin completely separates us from our Creator. And I know that for me in my life, you talk gratitude. If I'm sitting here in my selfishness, now mind you, I don't want to take away from the fact that there's truly people that are suffering. Job loss is horrible. Cancer is awful. Even maybe just having a bad day because you wrecked your car and everybody's okay. Like, that just sucks. We have a lot of first world problems, and sometimes we can't contrast it to a third world problem. But I still think, like, one of the things that I started to really be forced to learn, and it wasn't necessarily at 17 years old and as a juvenile, where somebody else made the decision for me that I wasn't going to leave for a minute. Right. But you talk selfishness, and looking back, I for sure see it that way now for me too. It's just like, man, it doesn't mean I didn't have emotions, like, and I needed to be heard and understood, or whatever that looked like for me. Because there was this sense, and I don't know if you guys have ever suffered in this in life, or you listen, it would be with other people, but it's like we all have this hole in our life, and we're trying to fill it. And it can happen through the use of like video games or cigarettes or pornography or, shopping addiction, gambling, or even, eating and stuff. And so, and you said it earlier that if I heard you right, you're like, I started to understand that life comes at you fast, where you start to have more of those experiences, and you would hope that you realize at a younger year the value of how quickly life can go, and how important it is to like have good people and around you, preferably family, hopefully, and good friends that influences you to make good choices to help you stay engaged in your hustle that you guys talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the selfishness thing, I'm grateful that people pointed it out to me too, because, and this isn't like this is fairly recent. Like I've been working on it, and I think I'm a lot better now than I was, but I've even had past relationships where in my mind everything was like fine, and I thought it was like everything was good, but realistically I wasn't giving that other person the amount of time that they deserved and needed as they were giving towards me. But that was something that I never caught on to, and I never would have unless, again, not going to drop names, but very thankful for this person for pointing it out for me, because even though I don't think I was as selfish, obviously, as I was growing up, it was like I was just oblivious to the fact that I wasn't putting in as much effort as the other person was. But up until the point where they actually physically pointed it out to me and showed me the whole long list of things, like, well, I've been doing this and that and that, and like that never like occurred to me, where I was like, wow, I've really been like a horrible person, and I truly apologize. Like, so I never would have known that either unless it got pointed out to me. And it really sucks that I had to have somebody tell me that I was that bad, but at the same time, I'm really grateful that they did, because I don't know if I ever would have found that out, because I'm off in my own little universe sometimes, and I have these things that I'm focusing on, and I can always give the excuse of like, oh, well, I had school, well, I was working on this video I had to edit, or this and that, but like, so did they. Like this girl was working, she was in school, but also she was like, when can I see you? When can I drive there? Like this and that. And I never was like, I just automatically assumed, since I was in school and since I was working on all these other side projects, that I didn't have enough time to give that extra amount of effort, when neither did she, but she at least tried. And I'm grateful that got pointed out, because, I finally realized at that point that there's more to life than what I have going on. And, a lot of times other people's needs need to be met before yours. I know, like, at least when they're on the airplane and they say the oxygen things drop, like, help yourself before you help other people. And I get that, but it's like I was basing my entire life off of that mentality of like, I need to be helped first before other people. And until I had all these things get thrown at me, where I finally was like, you know what? It is okay to help somebody else first. It's not all about me. It's not like I'm playing some video game and everybody else is just like a CPU character and it's all about Garrett. Like, everything's about Garrett. And that's how it always seemed, until I had all these examples, and I lost a couple friends and a couple relationships over this. And then the second someone finally just said, hey, look, dude, like, you need to give more time to other people, then I was finally like, had this big realization, or where I was like, ouch, because that's been my whole life, was like, even though I was getting better at being selfish, I was not getting better at separating that time or splitting up that time. until it got pointed out. And now I think I finally reached a point where it's like, it's okay to approach somebody else's needs before yours, especially if theirs is in more of a dire need than yours is.
Sure.
If somebody needs help with anything, like, you know, if somebody's struggling mentally or somebody's asking to see you that hasn't seen you in a long time, like, at that point, that's way more important than what I need to do. But I always have, like, some excuse pre-made in my mind where I was like, well, I can't do that because I have this homework assignment. Oh,
Yep.
well, I can't do that because I blah, 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 like, whatever the hell it was. But there's the thing that ultimately killed me was, like, some people you don't know how bad they're hurt. So if they could be one no away from, like, ending their life, and you'd never know. And so that's what I've really been trying to work on, is, like, saying yes more than saying no. And yeah, sorry, that was probably too much information. But
No, it's good. I actually want to go back to where you were talking about that hole and, like, filling it, and also I'll call it my relationship. For how long I've been in it, I actually struggled with that for a long time, and I hope my wife doesn't mind me sharing this, but I guess she'll like that I'm calling myself out. So
Yeah, you can blame me.
yeah, exactly. You can blame Devin. But no, for a long time in my relationship, I realized too that I would put a lot of things before her, and it was really dangerous and toxic to my relationship. So, for example, I would be like, "Hey, I'm doing this for us, baby. Like, I'm building this business for us. I'm, working so hard so that I can accomplish X, Y, Z to give back to you." She came to me one day and she said, "Look, by you doing X, Y, Z, you're not giving me X, Y, Z. And so, because you're spending your time over here, I'm now neglected." And like you said, people are one no away. And I feel like this happens more times than none. And I've only been married for less than, 8 months. But people are probably one no away from divorce because they see those priorities coming first, right? And you're nodding your head probably because, you even kids, right? Same scenario, right? It's like...
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been thinking, if we're going to speak on the topic of relationships, the first thing that overwhelmingly, and by the way, I probably misquote a lot of the scriptures sometimes, but, husbands, love your wives as Christ does the church. He gave himself up for her, presenting the church to himself spotless. And so I think to myself, man, how profound is that? And by the way, that's a huge calling. Like, think about how we are as males right now, as husbands, fathers, providers, whatever it is. Like, from this perspective of evolution, and we were hunter-gatherers, right? We have to do this and keep the feed, And I think now to your point there, and what you're saying earlier about being in a position where life gets so incredibly busy, when you're in the middle of, like, finding this purpose and you're pursuing towards it, whether it's a degree or you're trying to start a business or, pursuing music and all those other things, that you sort of like, it's hard to take a step back. And first of all, even when somebody is blessed enough to say it to you, like, you're really lucky if somebody even says it to you, especially your wife.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I got goosies, though. Because if we're talking about, again, like, if you've got a spouse that's even lucky enough to tell you those things, to be able to take a step back for just a moment and prioritize those important things in life, it's hard. Because, and by the way, that's not to say that I think, yes, you should, the way I view it, again, it's like, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love others as you love yourself. So there's a context in there that says, yes, you should love yourself. And I do believe that there's room for what people would define in the modern day word of boundaries. Like, you should know when you're like, man, I'm exhausted. Even Jesus was like, dude, I've been healing people all day long. I got to step aside and pray. Like, you spent time in that isolation. But, going back to there, to be able to take that step back, and it's a little bit of a different subject right now that I'm broaching, but you had mentioned your spouse said, well, when you're doing X, Y, Z, it doesn't give me X, Y, Z. And I think that's pretty key sometimes, where we get so caught up in our own noise that we can't hear others. No deaf pun intended.
100%. Like, I feel like for a while I've had the hearing aids on. Like, it's like I'm sitting there turning it off. We talked about it earlier, where it's like, oh, I don't want to hear this bullshit. And oftentimes I feel like it's human nature, because we're selfish creatures, to be like, oh, I'm turning on the hearing aids. And so I'm so blessed and so grateful that I have a wife who calls out my bullshit. She says, I need this from you. You're not giving it to me. What the hell? Where are you? because without a wife like that, man, I can only imagine how long my relationship would be lasting. And so my message, I guess, today, and my takeaway from today would be to anyone out there who maybe is neglecting their spouse or their children even, make sure to, turn off the hearing aid. Turn it, or maybe turn it on, right?
Yeah.
Not turn it off.
Or vice versa, one of the two.
Yeah, I'm not deaf, so I don't know. But but make sure you're tuning in to your loved ones. Tune into the ones that are around you, because like Garrett said, I mean, it could be today, it could be tomorrow. You don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Life's too short. Yeah. And so as much as we're going around filling in our own holes, take time for, to pick up a piece and fill in someone else's hole. Like, whoa, that sounded really... That was... Sorry, not like that. Okay. But you get the point. You get the point.
You both said it, not me.
So we established that as speech problem at the beginning, so... But
I think it doesn't matter how you get there, but you got to get there eventually. Yeah. And I in my situation, like I was saying, it sucks that I couldn't get there myself, but at the same time, I'm glad somebody else called it out.
Yeah.
Because, and obviously it's like I lost that person in the process because of something that was purely my fault. But at least in the end, they were nice enough to say, this is what I needed, and you didn't deliver that.
Respectfully, that's a good ex.
It is a good ex.
It's a good ex.
It is a good ex. They're
hard to come by.
She was nice enough to leave, but say why. Not like, oh, I can't do this anymore. She was like, look, I've been trying. I've been giving an effort, and I haven't been receiving the same amount of effort. So that's why. And I was like, now, in my mind, it goes back years before.
What a double-edged sword, though. I mean, cause, earlier I said all things work for good. And I could see that in your perspective where you're like, man, so it took this drastic situation until I was surrendered and cornered, and then I had this, realization, and in the end, I still, in some way, viewed it as a blessing, even though it hurt at the time.
Right.
And that's the same thing that sort of happened to me, and that I didn't really get that necessarily at 17 years old when I didn't have the choice, and here I am in this facility for a season before I get out, and I went right back into what I was doing. It was only until I don't know, more than a decade, almost 2 decades ago that I finally hit that final rock bottom, that you talk about, at least, where it was like, man, I am so sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that all of me was just being completely shut off. And I actually at that point now can say that I am learning more about me the less I become myself.
Wow. That's
I think that's what. Can you repeat that actually real quick?
Yeah, sure. So. And really I see that again from the scriptural reference. If I recognize that the fall of Adam and Eve has been separated themselves from God because they literally dwelled with him. And now there was a separation. And ever since then, we've been trying to get back to that original state. And to me, I view it as some sort of selfishness of trying to fill that void through all those things. To where, life is going to happen on life's terms, whether you like it or not. And to what I did eventually say is, what I'm learning through that process is I'm learning more about myself the less I become me, essentially.
Yeah. No, I love that. And honestly, you're 100% correct. And I'm not saying I should know better or know it all, but one thing I have observed just over the course of my life with individuals who are successful individuals, maybe even entrepreneurs, musicians, they all collaborate at the top. They're not selfish. They're not focused on me. They're focused on giving. I don't know if any of you guys have read the book, The Go-Giver. For the audience out there, I highly recommend it. But it talks about the more that you give, the more that you essentially receive. And in some cases, you can receive information on who you are as a person. Not necessarily materialistic, but essentially the more that you are giving and, helping other people out, I think, right, I mean, that's why God says serve your fellow man, right? The more you're serving someone, the more you're actually losing your old skin in the process and building your new self.
Right. Yeah, because you're a new creation, And that's another thing I have said for myself. Bless you.
Curveball. Thank you.
I thought you were going to take off on that one.
Oh, man. My sneezes are violent. Okay.
I also had another one for myself that I try to hold on to. Is the best way to stay out of my head and into my heart is by serving others.
Right.
And because it's important to me now, like to go through like the suffering and the loss of Brooke and everything else, where I'm like, man, like I can take any emotion and I can hold on to that thing to the ends of whatever, if it's bitterness, resentment, anger, contempt, lust, and when you're a slave to those things, you're a slave, but when you're free from that, you are free indeed, and I want to live more in that state of let go of me, and so I can find myself to have opportunities to be. Heck, I almost see in a way that happened last week.
Mm-hmm.
I showed up trying to just be in a position to figure out how to help people, and then here I am learning about, a podcast where I get an opportunity to share my story. I see that as divine intervention.
Oh, 100%. I
would
mean,
not have presented myself with selfishness. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you're good. Like last week, I mean, we literally were talking. You came in, for those of you that don't know, Devin's actually one of my insurance marketing reps. We work close together. But yeah, he came in and we literally just got talking about it. And I think there's a reason that, like you said, divine intervention, God probably said, hey, there's a reason I need to bring this up. And sure enough, we're here. And now you're going to be impacting the lives of, our audience. And you've definitely impacted our lives here for sure. I know that without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah,
So.
and I don't think I would have shared everything I shared until he
I've never seen you open up that much, to be honest.
I'm not an open upper.
No.
That's a new term I just trademarked myself, but I've never told anybody that.
No.
But he got the ball rolling, and then I was like, you know what? I have some shit to say.
You ever consider being a therapist?
And I enjoyed that you did too.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done that before. Outside of family or like a one-on-one conversation from somebody that I've known for my entire life, that story's never left my mouth before.
Well, now it's going to be
No
on
way.
an audience full of, eventually millions. So.
Yeah, eventual millions.
But that's where growth happens, is in the uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. So no, yeah, that was. If it weren't for Devin saying his story, I don't think I would have said anything.
Yeah.
But.
So I've been noticing this book this whole time. This is a yearbook, I'm assuming?
Oh, yeah. So, I brought this because actually a couple other things, and I'm probably fast forwarding now towards more modern day stuff, right? I mean,
Sure.
you heard me, the premature birth, Brooke, losing Brooke, visiting the facility, like running them, like I live in the rock star lifestyle without the career, if you will. Finally hit that last major rock bottom. I was like, man, I'm so sick and tired. And I can't say everything was perfect. It never was. I still had issues. I even have that in one of my songs. Issues will stay in place if you don't create problems. Voicing solutions aren't solvents. So, I still have had, I just never hit that kind of a rock bottom afterwards. But what was interesting is I found this a couple months ago, and my son's mom and I had gotten married, and it was actually on Brooke's birthday, August 31st. But what blew me away on this thing, you can see the lyrics here that I wrote to the first song, is I wrote it on July 5th, which happens to be my son's mom's birthday.
Holy cow.
Wow.
So I still, like, even today now have different things where, chalk it up to whatever you want. I choose to hold on to those things as being meaningful in my life now. But yeah, that's a picture of Brooke.
No way. And these are the lyrics that you wrote.
But that's the very first song I ever wrote.
You want to show the
That's the
audience
one.
real quick? You wouldn't mind showing a picture?
Oh, yeah.
There you go. That's amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so, I thought I would share that with you. 'Cause that was,
No, thank
I
you.
don't like looking at the year.
What's the year?
Time flies. I don't even want to tell you. 1999.
Hey, 19.
That's
I
a
wasn't
good
even-
year.
I wasn't born yet.
My older brother was.
Ouch.
Bro, and
Hang on, wait. Now you guys can talk about it.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome.
What else do you want to know?
No, I honestly, Devin, like, just from everything that has been shared here, I honestly, like, I'll just say it how it is. Like, I felt divine intervention in our conversation today. It's not often that we have a guest come on here and they're able to pour out their experiences and their stories and really be able to touch, us as hosts, but also our audience. I know our audience is gonna be very touched by what you've said here today, and so, I know you've got a song prepared.
Yeah, sure.
So we'd love to hear, it and some
that'd
snippets.
be a perfect wrap up to this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me
So-
get that guitar there now.
Yeah, no problem.
I wrote this song called Heart of a Rolling Stone. if ever I falter. Show me a heart changed by grace. Cut me apart from what keeps me awake. I know life ain't easy. It can break you to pieces. I won't lose my faith in you. I want it all. Heart of a rolling stone, ballad of a broken soul. I am not alone. I am not alone. Show me a heart changed by grace. Cut me apart from what keeps me awake. I know life ain't easy. It can break you to pieces. I won't lose my faith in you. I want it all of your heartache. I want your heartbreak. I'm not rejecting you. I want it all. Heart of a rolling stone, ballad of a broken soul. You are not alone. You are not alone.
Damn.
Wow.
Dude, that
That was
amazing.
incredible.
For context, you guys, he's deaf.
Yeah.
Wait.
And he literally just pulled off a masterpiece. Like, and you wrote all that yourself.
Yep.
That's unreal. And I think the message that it brings through rings true today, just from what we've talked about. Like, you really are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just going off of the song that we just heard, what's a final message that you'd want to share with the audience?
It could be, whether it's advice or something that you could give them to make their life happier and more enjoyable. But that's completely up to you. It doesn't have to have any context, but something that you could give the audience to walk away with that helped you personally, that could make their life better.
Yeah, that's so difficult because what weighs on my heart right now is those who think themselves wise is made a fool. And I want to live my life in a state of humility to the best of my ability so that I might make wise choices. So if that's just the poetic way that I could say that to someone else, and hopefully to be able to influence and inspire them to make good choices and to understand they're not alone, and that there's plenty of people that walk into like religious churches and different things, but there's not enough people that are outside of those walls being able to express what I just said about a loving God who can meet them exactly where they're at. So that would be my message anyways. But I try to be careful about advice simply because I don't want to see myself as a wise person, but if there's any encouragement, just understand that it's broken stuff that I went through. You can still make different choices and have good things and bear fruit in your life and help others.
Wow. I love that. That's amazing. Thank you for coming out with us, Devin. And I think that's a good place where we're going to wrap it up. And
Yeah.
Cool.
So
That was incredible. Yeah. Thank you for letting us, be the host of your story. And, hopefully some people watching out there can resonate and be able to connect with that. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Shout out to you guys. Thanks for being my hustle.
Never switch on the homies in the day ones. They didn't wanna open doors, so we made some. Take a bow on these haters like I'm Trey Young. That direct deposit hitting like a bass drum. Incoming, coming.